Do you think playing video games has influenced how you think about art and design? The global gaming market size was valued at over $221 billion in 2024. It's easy to overlook, but video games have quietly transformed into one of the most dynamic, innovative forms of creative expression in the modern world. Today, we'll explore their art and design.
Welcome to the Gentleland Show, where we talk about game development, design, and culture. It's your access to all things in the games industry. We're your guides.
Hey, I'm Jacky, founder of Gentleland, computer scientist, and digital artist.
I'm Edwin, a composer, sound designer, and opera singer.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam, a business and marketing expert and a co-founder at Gentleland.
Today, we are talking about the art and design of video games. For me personally, games are such a unique medium that allows to combine all the prior ways of entertainment, such as theater, cinema, books, audio, and much more into one. So Sam, how was your experience with games in the past?
My early experience with video games has always come from this standpoint of me being really young. So I already didn't know anything about the world. And so the video game world was like another world on top of the real world. And so I just had to figure out what was going on in this video game. It was just like a funny experience of being 4 or 5 years old, not really being able to describe everything around me, and then having to jump into this digital world and not really understanding game UI or game function or music, sound, art kind of in it. It was really interesting. It was very formative because a lot of what I did later on in life was I took those artistic references used in the game, for example, as references for outside things in real life.
That's such an interesting take. Edwin, do you have anything from an audio designer perspective you would want to add?
If we're talking about just formative games from our childhood that have influenced our approach to art later on in life, definitely for me, two things that come to mind are Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, wonderful soundtrack, and Banjo and Kazooie, actually. The soundtrack for Banjo and Kazooie is absolutely iconic, but all I really remember, and it really matches Sam's experience, is I was very young playing this Banjo and Kazooie game, and just everybody was talking about how great the soundtrack was. And I seem to remember I kind of picked up on the mood. I just enjoyed the general mood. But at that point, I didn't have this musical expertise I now have. I was just vibing with it. And I think that tallies what Sam was saying about how when you're younger, you're kind of approaching this game without really knowing what's going on or what's in it, but you can still be aware of all these different parts in it.
Yeah, when I think of video games, then I think of this unique combination of all that's been before, and I almost have to think of it like a museum. I know this may be sounding weird, but I think of it as you have so many contributions from so many artists inside of the game itself. So let's say you see a table, then someone designed that table inside of this game. And that's how I approach almost all of the games around there, where I'm just looking at them and then I'm almost analyzing them from that standpoint of, okay, you have a 3D modeler that's designing all the 3D assets like table, chairs, whatnot. You have an UI artist, you have an illustrator who made or concepted the game world. And to me, games are not only that thing that you see when you look on it from superficial level, but also when you go and take a step further and look into all the tiny little details.
So Sam, as a child, did you notice some of these tiny details? And do you think that informed how you then later approached that object in older life?
Oh, absolutely. There's this older game called Super Mario 64. It was one of the first big Super Mario revamps from Nintendo as they released the Nintendo 64, which was, from a technology standpoint, a really big jump from the Super Nintendo. So we were going from a 2D pixel art, even if it was relatively high fidelity 2D pixel art, to full-on 3D modeling. And so Super Mario 64 was really interesting because for the first time, I was able to experience Mario in a 3D space. And as a very young child playing all the early Super Mario Brothers on Super Nintendo and the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, you can't really even tell like what was what. Like early on Mario games, I was looking at the coins that were like yellow round things, and for some weird reason, I thought they were alligators. Like it looked like an alligator head to me. It didn't even look like a coin. I didn't even know what they were for a long time until someone told me, oh, those are clearly coins. And then so in the Super Mario 64, you see it clearly as a coin. Like you can see very much, it's like a round, it's got depth, it's round, it's spinning, there's a star motif on it. And so those little details really allowed me to understand, oh, this is the Super Mario world building. Like I'm starting to understand the castle for the first time. I'm starting to understand fireballs and these little Goombas for the first time. I thought they looked like owls because they were in that weird mushroomy brown shape. I thought Goombas were owls, but they're actually just brown mushrooms apparently with like teeth. So that was like really interesting as a detail. And then also, I don't know if you've played Super Mario 64. It's a wonderful game. I encourage everyone to at some point play it at some point. But the levels, you jump through paintings. And if you walk up to a painting and you don't know it's an entrance to a level, when you walk up to it, it ripples, kind of like water or like water on the pond or like wind and a flag. And so that to me was a really cool detail that like something that was environmental, it's supposed to look like a painting on the wall, but as you walk up to it and bump into it or get close to it, it ripples and it kind of hints to you that this is actually the entrance to the level that you're looking for. It's not immediately obvious to you. And so I found that those were all really interesting design things, and I think Nintendo always does a really good job, like from an artistic perspective, from a UI UX perspective, from a world building perspective, that someone like me as a kid who of course didn't have any understanding of any of those things is still able to pick it up very organically and naturally.
That's such an interesting point because children find it much harder to understand something that symbolizes something. The brain generally hasn't developed that ability, or it's not as sophisticated as in an adult. And that leads into just this concept of how a lot of games have to be designed. A lot of the art and design in these games has to just respect we still can't make the real world in a game. And it's so easy to forget that so many things in a game, even with today's technology, are still symbolic of something else. And just because we're used to gaming, because we're adults, we now know that those things are those things, and we don't even have to think about it. But my experience as well, playing games really young, was like, okay, these eggs are apparently coins. I thought I was collecting eggs, and I thought like everybody in the world loved trading eggs for items, or, you know, as a kid, you don't even question it. You just kind of enjoy it. And I think also what you said about these Nintendo design choices, they're so astute because they make these worlds that visually are really fun for younger kids, even if they don't understand them. They just get it on a kind of emotional level.
Yeah, Edwin, I think that your comment about the emotive side of things and the emotional side of things is really important because we as human beings all have like this emotional through line, for example. Kind of like giving another example of a very early Nintendo game is this game called Duck Hunt, where it's like this flat shooter. You've got this plastic gun that you point at the screen. It's kind of like cool tech for like really early 90s. But basically, like the level starts, there's a little dog. The dog jumps in the grass and a little duck flies out and you try to shoot the duck. And if you get the duck, then the dog grabs the dead duck, and yay, makes a fun kind of like you win sound. But if you miss the duck, the dog actually kind of laughs at you and gives you like it's like not really like obviously you want to like shoot the duck and get a bunch of points or whatever, but it's funny that I thought that Nintendo designed this emotional relationship that you have as a hunter, in air quotes, with like your dog, and your dog like laughs at you or encourages you. And it's really funny because like the dog is clearly like an NPC, right? But it's like also representing the game because like the game itself is kind of invisible. There really isn't a villain. And so the dog ends up becoming your NPC and also the villain because you get really angry when the dog laughs at you. And I remember lots of times like shooting at the dog when I'm like, don't laugh at me. Didn't you see how fast these ducks were flying as you advance to the other levels, right? So that's always been really kind of funny for me. But kind of like taking just a very simple video game like that and then starting to scale it up in like higher and higher fidelity of like new consoles. And we have like, you know, Super Mario Kart and Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid and Halo and Breath of the Wild and so many, and like Fortnite, World of Warcraft, you know, like bringing things up to like a more realistic level. Edwin, I wanted to ask you about kind of like if you had some thoughts, especially in terms of like art and design, about kind of like your thoughts on realism and being realistic in video games.
I love the point you were making about Duck Hunt, because I think that's just this perfect example of something Nintendo does brilliantly. We've got a fully functional game with a hunter and some ducks. The dog's unnecessary. We don't even need the dog. But the dog is giving the emotional level to this gameplay. It's actually, the dog is here symbolizing that what you're doing has some kind of meaning. You're not just shooting ducks on a TV screen. I mean, like we were saying earlier, if you're a kid, you might not even know what duck hunting is. And it's the dog who's kind of taught you what the game is as you're playing it. So I just love that in games, quality art and design does not mean realism. It can, but it's completely unnecessary. It's just, what is the game trying to achieve? And do all of the, let's call them symbols, do all of the components coming together assist the game in achieving what it's trying to do? And that objective might simply just be trying to have fun. But if all of the elements are working in harmony, and sometimes in quite unintuitive ways, I wouldn't have thought of putting a dog that laughs at you in a duck hunting game, then it's brilliant. The result is magical and memorable. Jacky, as an artist, do you tend to find people asking a lot for realistic art? Or do you think people actually prefer a lack of realism in what you're making for them?
That totally depends on the type of game that you have, right? So when we talk about art for games, then we also have to always look, sadly, at the budget of the game developer or the game studio. Very hyper-realistic games do usually require a large budget. That is just often the case. With that, we know, for example, concept art that has to portray a certain amount of realism, you only almost find in that genre. And the lower budget you go, the more stylized games you can also find out there. I personally like both types of artworks. I really like to create very realistic pieces. And I also like to create very, very hyper stylized art pieces, because there is a certain beauty in finding new and unique styles when it comes to artistry. You know, like you can go with very strong stylistic choices that you, for example, could not go with hyperrealism. You could not go with a monochromatic painting. You could not go with something that's only hyper line art, because the market for that is so niche that you rarely really get to do these types of creative expressions other than with indie games, for example. So I personally think realism in art for games, sometimes I don't think it's yet there when I look at 3D models, when I look at, like how they are rendered. I feel there's always this layer of uncanny valley that you have there. So I personally like the stylized artworks a bit better, just because they allow you to communicate that illusion or that, that emotion, that game feeling that you're trying to portray a bit better.
Yeah, I also totally agree, because sometimes when you are too realistic and not using stylized art to drive emotion, you get this effect in like a lot of video games that are set in a modern day setting. Of course, you're doing like environmental design. So there's like that old inside game industry trope where like developers have to splash yellow paint everywhere to like capture people's attention, like yellow arrows going up the ladder, or like a beautifully placed spotlight right around this door. And, there's like doors everywhere in the environment, but like 99% of all the doors are locked, because like that's not where people don't want you just wandering into buildings if you're like in a zombie apocalypse. So that's always been like a funny thing for me.
Yeah, also realistic is chaotic. The whole point of a game is you're interacting with your environment, but the environment as is just naturally appearing doesn't have any prompts telling you where you're meant to go or whatever. So the arrows, I mean, please keep them. They're really useful. As a musician, I've come across a word before that actually describes this synthesis of art forms. It was made in relation to opera. I think it was the composer Richard Wagner who first started using it. The word is Gesamtkunstwerk. Sam, Do you know what that word is? Have you come across it?
No clue at all. Gesamt, I have no idea. Something work. I know there's like work in the word. No clue.
Well, I think someone among us might have a very good idea what it means and be able to pronounce it much better than me.
As a German speaker, it's Gesamtkunstwerk, which is basically the entirety of the spectrum of what you're trying to portray. So to see it as a holistic, unique, full thing and not just as many pieces stitched and combined together.
And I think that's something amazing about games. I think they're almost uniquely positioned these days in our times as the art form that combines all the art forms pretty much. For example, the Final Fantasy series really goes for the Gesamtkunstwerk philosophy. They even sometimes hire costume designers. They're just pouring every art form they can think of into their games. And the result is, I think, pretty cool.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Final Fantasy world building is incredibly immersive.
Here's to the artistry, the passion, and the magic that makes gaming unforgettable. If you want to join in on the conversation, make sure to come and talk to us on our socials. Until next time, keep playing, keep creating, and keep celebrating the incredible minds behind the games we love.
You can join the conversation by tagging us at The Gentleland on X, TikTok, and Instagram. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn at Gentleland. Have questions or comments about the show? Send us an email, podcast@gentleland.net.
Be sure to let us know what you think about today's episode on social media. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with your friends in the games industry. Thanks for listening. We hope you learned something new. We really appreciate you joining us for the Gentleland Show.